Welcome to Gatecrashers, a podcast dedicated to kicking open the door to your next favorite thing. Our mission, our creed, our code is this: to make all things more approachable and accessible to everyone. We want you to find a universe that you'll fall in love with. I'm RJ Durante, my pronouns are he, him, and I will be your host for this interview. I am privileged to have joining with me again author Stacy Cade. I had the pleasure of interviewing her for the release of her book Dead Silence in 2022, and she has very graciously agreed to join us again. You'll find her under the nom de plume S.A. Barnes, and today she joins me to discuss her new spine-tingling space horror novel, Ghost Station. When she is not writing and is able to finally remove her literary mask and cape, she works in a high school library, molding the minds of future readers. Again, please welcome Stacy Cade. Stacy, thank you for doing this nonsense again. We really appreciate it. First off, congratulations again on Dead Silence back in 2022, nominated for a Goodreads Award, and a plethora of others. I told you this the last time. It knocked my socks off. I went in with high expectations, and you killed it. So again, congrats on that. But now we're back again with Ghost Station. But before we even dive into that, I think it's important we start with a really hard-hitting question. Say you're stranded in space. What book are you bringing with you to keep your sanity?
Oh, that is such a hard question because I'm a mood reader. So whenever I go anywhere, I just came back from touring for Ghost Station, and my best friend from college, I was like, okay, so now the hard thing, I figured out what I'm bringing to wear. How many books can I squeeze into my suitcase? Because I need to, like I might not be in the mood for this one. Maybe I need a mood, like maybe I need romance because I'm stressed, or maybe I need, all these things. And she goes, Stacy, you can only bring 2 because you're going to be in a bookstore every single day. I'm like, yeah, but maybe I'm on the plane and I don't have the right book that I need to have. So we compromised, and I took 3 and bought 5. So I'm really not good at this question. I think what I would probably bring, just based on the number of rereads in my life, would be Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen, just because I have read that multiple times. And I'm always finding something new in there, mainly because I think it does take some effort to sort of like understand her world and the way that she wrote about things. So therefore there's something new every time.
Great answer. I'm just glad you weren't thinking, oh, I just opened the airlock. Like that's me out and done.
No, man, no. I think I would probably, though, I'll tell you, I know myself, and I would probably eventually write my own stuff, even if I wasn't, just because that's what I do it for to begin with, is to entertain myself. So,
and it's a question I chose. Obviously, we already know what your favorite sandwich is, and that's what we did last time. I figured this would be a little more in tune with
what did I say? I don't remember.
I, honest to God, forgot to go back and look at the old video.
Well, my guess is it's either peanut butter and jelly or grilled cheese with pickles. So those are my 2.
It was the grilled cheese with pickles. I actually distinctly remember that. It was the grilled cheese with pickles because you threw me for a loop. You were like, oh, it's a grilled cheese sandwich. And I think you even mentioned like what the cheese were. And you're like, oh, and pickles. And I was like, oh, okay, that's the curveball. Okay.
Yeah. Good to know I'm consistent at least.
That is, yeah, your consistency is what we look for in any author. That's all I can say. Yeah, Ghost Station. Holy crap. I was just as impressed as I was with Dead Silence. Ghost Station came to me, and I'm not gonna lie, I finished it in a night. It was one of those ones, yeah. And it wasn't one of those like, damn it, you gotta get this done. Like this is, time is crunched here. It was one of those, if I don't find out what happens here, it's gonna bother me at work tomorrow, and like I'm gonna have to open up like my Kindle app on my phone and just pretend that I'm actually doing something important.
That is my goal, to destroy productivity at work. So
Congratulations, you did a fine job.
You.
So, getting into actual Ghost Station, it's kind of this very familiar territory where you have a mix of sci-fi and horror, but there's still plenty of surprises in store. So specifically for this, what was your inspirations for the setting, the plot, especially to this novel?
So this one is sort of a weird one because as I've talked about before, sometimes ideas show up and they're all there. All the pieces are there. You may have to do some rearranging or kind of shuffling or whatever. Other times you sort of feel like, okay, I've got this piece. What other, I know that these things kind of go together, but I can't figure it out. This was very much one of those where I had to sort of go, okay, well, I know I want this and I know it does this and I know she does that. And how does this all work together? So the setting specifically I wanted to do because I'm fascinated by, and I always have trouble saying this, tidally locked planets. Planets that don't like the moon. We always see the same thing. It doesn't, yeah.
Yeah. Hmm.
Um, because, then there's a kind of a strip, where you would be in perpetual twilight, which I found
Hmm.
fascinating because as someone who still has, maybe a few issues with the dark, I'm an adult, but still, if I watch something scary or read something scary, I'm like, I am pretty sure there's something on the floor. Anyway, um, my dog has given me heart attacks that way. Uh, so I liked the idea of there is no morning, right? There is no sunrise. There's nothing. So you're just caught in this kind of perpetual gloom. So that part I was interested in. But I really wanted to play with the idea. I'm a big mystery reader. Obviously, actually, I read most everything, but locked room mysteries are fascinating to me.
Hmm.
How can this be happening when it's only so many people? And who's lying? Is someone lying? Is there something else going on? That's really what I wanted to play with. So that's why Lyria became what it was. Additionally, the alien ruins aspect of that, because I'm curious, because I think sometimes we may actually get out there and find all these ruins but not any aliens, which would be so disappointing. So I was just kind of playing with that idea, in terms of the setting, and ice, because I really wanted it to be hostile and nasty and just like the worst place to be.
I and when reading it too, it gave you such a feeling of just absolute loneliness. And I think that's what space does very well, especially space horror. It is the abject idea of we're out here and we're out here alone. Like there is
Hmm.
nothing's coming, nothing's here. And obviously with any sort of found ruins, and again, I found this the same way when I was reading. I was like, wow, this is like it kind of like it unnerves you a bit because it's something ancient, but it also still feels new and threatening and dark.
Yep.
So yeah, it was enthralling. I'm honest when I say it. It just captured me, and I was very happy from beginning to end. But specifically in this, you have to do a lot of world building
Hmm.
in your stories, and you know, sci-fi elements, horror aspects. It, there's a lot in there. Some authors absolutely despise having to think of the name of the ships, name of the planets, name of new technologies that you're making up on the fly. Do you enjoy doing that? Is that something that like you real like when you're writing down, like, oh yeah, like let me think of the name of this and jot it down here and there or pull it from something that you see in everyday life?
it's it's tricky because I want to be careful, to make sure that it's clear enough that you don't have to keep flipping back to go, wait, what was that thing? What is this? Who is this? What ship is this? So, and I also want it to be relatable. So, for example, in sometimes I really do get joy out of it. I just kind of giggled to myself when I got to write, in Dead Silence. I created a ship called the Ginsburg because, we tend to name ships after people, and it was actually before she passed away, I think. And I was, they typically end up being named like Washington or
Hmm.
Jefferson, and I'm like, no, 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 no. Let's change things up a little bit here. So I do like some of that. Some of those things are harder because again, you're trying to not be so opaque that people will struggle with it, but also you don't want it to sound like, oh, that's an iPod or whatever. You know what I mean? Like you want to kind of like come up with something that is relatable without being too familiar. And
Hmm.
sometimes that's hard. I won't lie. Sometimes there are things where I call it, placeholder device, or whatever. I just go through and then fix it later because I don't want to, especially if I've got momentum going in a story, I don't want to stop for something like that. I'll go back and I'll think of something later. But yeah, it can be tricky, and like things, you want to make sure that you're, honestly, PMU, portable medical unit. I mean, could I be more basic than that? I just didn't know. But there were questions about that, like when in part of the story where they're talking about the Kellerson pack, and someone's like, "Did you mention this before?" I'm like, "Crap, did I mention it before? I think I mentioned it before." And then you have to go back and kind of make sure because you want to make, it was 20 pages ago,
Hmm.
and the Kellerson pack plays kind of a significant role in the story. So you
Hmm.
like you can't have somebody going, "What the hell is a Kellerson pack?"
And sci-fi can be as simplistic as possible, especially, and you brought up the great point with the PMU. You just have to think like probably everything has to have an acronym because
Yes.
space, engineering, space travel, even medicine, like everything is very tightened. Everything has to be succinct, but like you have to know exactly what you're talking about. But going to the idea of like you don't want to kind of create something new just for the sake of creating something new. I liken it to when fantasy authors have to think of like that word for someone who is born with magic. Like, what is the name in my world building role? And I know it's been like kind of made fun of to death, but like, oh, I am a no mage. I don't do the old magic or anything like that. Like, just it's difficult, and I'm sure
It
as
is.
a writer, you're just like, I don't want to be made fun of for what I'm about for what I'm about to call this. They're gonna be like, no, that you're right. That's an iPod. That's She basically just made an iPod on a ship. But uh, bless you for fighting through that struggle because I'm looking through the names like the ship being called the Resilience.
Mhm.
I was like, yeah, that's a good ship name. Like I really enjoyed that. Um,
Do you want to know where that
but
came from?
I am I'm here.
So I had read a book. It's called Grit by Angela Duckworth, I think. It's a psychology book. And I think it was actually, I got it from the library where I work, and it was really interesting because I read it a couple years ago, actually even before when I was probably Dead Silence, in the middle of Dead Silence. And when I was really struggling with writing and what was going to happen and where were these books going to go, was somebody going to buy them? And what I found really interesting in that book was that she said that resilience is what matters more than talent, um because it's about the grit to keep going. It's about,
Hmm.
persistence. And so I was like, oh, this is perfect. I'm gonna that they are resilient. They are resilient. So that's why the ship is named that.
That's awesome. And thinking back to how, especially with like Ginsberg, I just remember this sci-fi novel that kind of played into that, where the female protagonist was naming the ships after famous women,
Hmm.
and she she had said, "Oh, this one is going to be the SS Earhart," and the captain turned to her and said, "Maybe we don't use that one." Like,
That's
I,
fantastic.
and it just popped in my head. I'm just thinking, like, kudos to that author. Like, that is just it's such like a sneak in, and I think that's something that you did really well. Like, you have these little blurbs where I giggled to myself. I'm like, I know what she's talking about. And I think too the fact that I've actually talked to you really has helped because I kind of get your humor. So it even enlightened the experience of reading it. But shifting from kind of the novel to maybe more of the movies that we are both familiar with,
Oh yes.
Event Horizon, Aliens to an extent. I think Alien did a little more better with the sci-fi and horror, where Aliens kind of jumps really into the sci-fi aspect of it.
Yeah.
Um, but what do you think it is about sci-fi and horror that just makes them like kind of merge so well together and create such very dynamic products?
That's a good question. I think it's a couple things. I think in general we're afraid of things that we're afraid of the unknown. So I think that's
Hmm.
why we see a lot of space horror and we see a lot of underwater horror. Um and we see even Arctic horror because we just don't a place where where it can't be contained, where there are unknown factors. I feel like that is a big um part of that. But I also think it's because sci-fi, not always, but sci-fi focuses on the hopefulness of humanity or the striving or the ambition of humanity. And horror tends to, you know, I read books, I read a book on craft, on writing and whatever, and they talked about how horror requires a sin in the house or a sin in the room. In other words, not necessarily like a sin as in, the seven deadlies or whatever, but like, selfishness in some form, right?
Hmm.
Horror requires that. And so, because you have to have some place to go, you have to have some lesson to be learned, some change, especially in your main character. So I kind of feel like it's the contrast of the hopefulness and the advancement of humanity, along with, hey, they're still doing that same old crap that they were doing before. And
Yep.
how are they going to get out of this one? Which one's going to win? Like, is it going to be, humanity is on the right track, we're still screwed up, but we're getting there? Or is it going to be like, oh well, it's all downhill from here?
And and like into what you said, you still have to walk that fine line because otherwise you're just going too heavy sci-fi, too heavy horror, and then um, but in that same breath, you're still trying to appease two very different kind of genres of readers. But I think you walked to the tightrope to perfection. So
Thank
kudos
you.
there. And leaning more into like horror and science, horror and science fiction. There is sinus issues going. We got some allergies over here. I don't know how you
Oh,
guys are doing out there.
same
It's
100%. Yes.
all in my brain now, right? Okay, so horror and science fiction often reflect a spectrum of societal and individual fears, like we've kind of talked about. We talk, in your book, mistrust of corporations, wealth inequality, just like the individual stress and anxiety from everyday cohabitation. Um, Now, looking at Ghost Station, looking at Dead Silence, like what kind of themes do you feel yourself returning to and being like, I find comfort in writing about this, but I can also expand on it. Like what do you particularly see?
I think that what I go back to a lot, speaking of kind of like the sin in the house or whatever, it is greed generally. I feel like that tends to be now in both of these cases, it's specifically corporate greed.
It's
And
always
how that
corporate greed.
it's
Let's be
always
honest.
corporate
It's
greed. I
it's
mean,
always corporate
really,
greed.
it kind of
From the
is. I mean,
Watani Company down, we just has started with that and it just went by the
well, and
wayside.
I feel like that resonates, and I'm not inclined to walk away. I may try different permutations of that, but I'm not inclined to like completely leave that behind because I feel like that's so relatable to where we are right now, where corporations frequently have more rights than people do. Um, so I kind of feel, I feel like that's relatable. I'm also really interested thematically in people who are struggling with who they are or who they think they should be.
Hmm.
And that plays a role in all of them actually. The one that's sorry, I'm thinking already about the one that's next. But yeah,
That's
I
for
sort of
later, folks.
it is, sorry. I think it's just that fascination of somebody working out their own issues on this scale where that could get them killed, like, right, like you would have that story, you could have that story in any genre,
Hmm.
but in horror, or specifically in this case sci-fi horror, but in horror you can die or people can be killed because you're not willing to see a certain truth about yourself. And I just find like the stakes of that absolutely fascinating.
I keep going back to the idea of a Walmart spaceship and kind of like what the dystopian hell that faces us in the future. And I look forward to the book about that, obviously, because I'm sure that's coming. Uh,
I would totally read
um,
that. I won't lie. I
yeah,
would totally
yeah,
read
you'll be
that.
both. You'll be both. Going back to Dead Silence, I think something you do exceptionally well, and something that I see a ton of writers and authors struggle with is when you kind of create a quantity of characters that you have to follow along in an entire book. It's like one really fleshed out character, and then force that you are able to create intricate backstories for everybody, and it kind of impacts how the horror sci-fi takes place because you're vested. And I feel like if you don't flesh out the characters, you're not vested at all. But once you learn about these people and what their motives are, you're like, oh yeah, I kind of have to root for this guy, or oh, I get where
Mhm.
they're coming from now. So, what is your process with characters?
So that's really important to me, that people get invested in the characters and that people care about them, because this is going to sound horrible. But let's face it, not everybody's getting out alive. So if you don't care about that, then I feel like I haven't done my job, right? Because I feel like then if it doesn't matter, um, I'm going to be really careful here. On certain shows where random people just kept dying and you barely got to know them, and then all of a sudden they're gone and you're like, okay, I don't really care. I'm trying to avoid that. I'm trying to make you
Mm-hmm.
care. Um, when I'm doing this though, I always try to keep in mind, there's this theory called goal motivation and conflict by an author named Deb Dixon.
Mm-hmm.
And she's primarily a romance writer, but this applies to everything. And basically, she has this theory, which is that, everything you do for the protagonist, you should also do for the antagonist. Or in my case, I'm thinking about it like, I want this story to exist. Like, if I were to ever go back and tell Ghost Station from Liana's point of view, I could do that.
Yeah.
Or if I wanted to go back and tell that from, Ethan's point of view, I could do that. And even though I can't see a situation in which I would do that, I want people to feel like there's stuff going on. Like, these people don't just exist when they walk into the room. They had a whole
Yeah.
life before. They're
Mm-hmm.
doing other stuff on the ship while Ophelia's poking around and stuff she shouldn't be poking around with. I mean, that's kind of what I want, is for them to sort of live and breathe on their own. Because also part of it is that Ophelia, um breathes, comes to life, is reactive to that. So in other words, like, how they all interplay with each other, that matters. So if they're flat and sort of featureless, then that doesn't give her anything to play off of. And especially with a psychologist as a main character, I kind of needed people to be messed up, because otherwise it's a very boring book.
And especially in this one, I found myself kind of being when certain things happen, you're like, damn, I liked that person. Like, and
Yes.
and you haven't done your job unless somebody actually says that. And I agree with you. You see a lot in television, especially where it's just like, oh, they died? Okay. Like, then that person didn't do their job, like making you actually feel something for them. Not that you should, it's TV, who cares? But I mean,
No,
I mean,
I mean, I love that though. I think you should feel something, but I can imagine where if you're doing like, 18, 22 episodes or whatever it is, and you're like, my gosh, we have to kill another person. It's like, and then you got to bring new people in, so you have enough people, and then I mean that would be a really daunting task. I am playing on a much smaller scale in a way, so I can kind of set my own standards.
I think the the tough thing too is with any sort of setting in space with horror, you're like, not, you're right, not everybody's making out of this. Like, and that's
Mhm.
part of the fun. You're always like left guessing till the very end of being like, oh shit, they made it. Like, how'd they? Okay. And I think about a couple novels where I've read where somebody who I thought was like, oh yeah, this guy's like an ex-commando, like he's gonna be fine, and then like 40 pages in, you're like, I guess not. Like that.
Mm-mm.
That that's terrible.
I think
Um,
that's kind of one of the fun things too, is that I like to, if my main characters can get out of their own way, they are usually uniquely qualified to understand something about the situation, right?
mhm.
But they're so messed up at the beginning, they're not going to be able to do that. So part of that is that struggle of trying to, I don't want to look at this thing that this situation is making me look at, and am I going to be able to do this in time to save, other people? And sometimes, most of the time, the answer is nope, not all of
Nope,
them.
nope.
Sorry. I have to ask you a question though.
Oh God. Go
Um,
for it.
and it's only because you said that you were familiar with my sense of humor, so I want to know what you thought of Suresh.
Uh, so when you introduce the character, and for those who haven't read, Stacey does a phenomenal job with little blurb backstories of each character, and a lot of that expedition can be found and one part where Filio's going down kind of the records of each person, and because anyone who would board that ship in that position would want to know kind of a psychological profile of the people that they're spending 18 months with. So Suresh is one character, and uh, when you gave the blurb about their previous antics and what they um, I was like, oh boy, like it could have went one of two ways. Like I was like, how dark she gonna make this book? But luckily it went the funny antic way of like the classical sexual harassment of the workplace type thing. But I actually, no spoilers here, enjoyed the direction you went with the character, and it's
Nothing like
kudos
me
to
putting
you.
you completely on the spot and making you
No,
answer questions about my book.
because here's the thing. After 10 pages, I was like, I hope he fucking dies. But I I I got over that quickly. And I think that's a testament to how you navigated the character, because by the end I was like, whether or not that person makes it, I was like, oh, okay, I'm satisfied with the direction you went with it. I obviously aligned myself more with Ethan, but
Of
of
course.
course, who wouldn't? Um,
Ethan is speaking as the person who does not feel like she created him, but he was just there. Ethan's pretty
mhm,
awesome.
yeah. Um, and I I'm looking at the other crew. I'm looking at Kate, Liana, Birch, and I found myself keep going back to Birch,
Mhm.
um, in the sense that like kind of his path was the most indicative of like where the story was going, and it's kind of usually you have this point in any horror film or horror novel where it's kind of like the match lights the stick of dynamite and you're
Yes.
slowly waiting, and then like with Birch the match is lit and now everything starts building up and building up, and it made the book kind of turn to like it like ramped it up like automatically. As much as I love a slow burn, which at parts it was, like you
Hmm.
kind of were able to just still have these like explosive moments, like intermittent, where you're like at the end of a chapter, you have this great cutoff line, or so whoever, kudos to the editor or yourself, who who was like, yep, we're stopping right here, and then we're like kicking off to the next chapter. And it's probably the reason why I stayed up and read straight through, because it was like the dangling of the carrot. I was like, God damn it, I gotta keep reading this.
My
Um,
evil plan worked. I love it.
yeah, damn you for making people read books. But you had talked about the main characters, and so we have Claire from Dead Silence, we have
Hmm.
Ophelia. They're obviously very different characters,
Hmm.
but they both have that like badass female protagonist feel to them. Sometimes make
Poor decisions.
questionable. I was gonna
Poor
say
decisions.
questionable judgment calls. Um, but I mean, they're obviously both entangled in very dark and harrowing situations. Are there any tropes in horror and science fiction specifically that you wanted to reimagine, subvert, especially from a female protagonist perspective, because I know a lot of pitfalls of like making someone appear dumber than would be necessary or weaker than would move the plot. Just any thoughts on that?
Those are so what I find interesting, and I think a lot of people might struggle with this if they don't sort of see it the same way that I do, which is that I think everybody's pretty okay with Claire. I love Claire because she's willing to make the hard decisions even if she's making a mistake. Sometimes she's determined to make a mistake even when everyone else is like going, no, that's a bad idea. Um, but Ophelia is different because one, she is not the commander in this situation.
Correct.
So her agency is limited in some respects. She can pull the card and say, I'm gonna bench you all basically for medical reasons or psychological reasons. But she's trying really hard not to do that, both for selfish reasons and for them, to try to keep them, earning money and working. Um, what I find interesting in people's reaction and the reason I did it the way that I did it is because I wanted to avoid the trope of someone who has all the answers, someone who always makes the right decision, someone who is, not really flawed except for, oh, maybe they're impatient or maybe they're, short-tempered or whatever. Like Ophelia is messed up. I mean, she is. I mean, she should not she should not be a psychologist, probably. And or if not, or not in this situation. And so to me, I felt like that played against that trope because it's not
Hmm.
necessarily a competency thing. Like a lot of times, one of the things we like is to watch people be really good at their jobs. But part of the reason that she isn't is because that's a decision that she has made based on this trauma that has happened to her in the past, right? So I think going against that grain and not making her like, oh, we're sending for you because you're the best in your field and you'll come fix this, but no, you're the person who screwed up, and we're going to send you out there mainly because we want you to get rid of you until people can forget that you exist. Um,
Exactly.
I wanted to play with that. I wanted to do the reverse of the common trope. Um, but that being said, I think a lot of people are like, wait, what are you doing? I don't know if I like her. Like, I understand because she does some really unlikable stuff and she's not an easy person. I honestly think that's some of the reason. There are multiple reasons why this one's in third person and Claire was in first person. And I think it's because Ophelia is just very difficult as
Hmm.
a first person character because she's uncomfortable with herself, which makes the reader uncomfortable with her.
And I think too, kind of the way I'm trying to tiptoe around at certain plot points. Um, the way, especially with Ophelia, it's kind of like, okay, this protagonist is going to be removed from the direness of the situation and then is thrown completely into the direness of the situation. Um, it kind of turns your opinion on her a little bit. I felt towards the beginning of the novel, I had a much easier time kind of connecting with Claire and being like, yeah, like you got
Hmm.
this. And then Ophelia, I was like, what are you doing? Like, what? Come on, like, um, and
Yeah.
then as soon as like kind of things started happening, I was like, okay, you need to get out of this. Like, come on, like, get your shit together. Like, you got to make this. Like, you got to be okay. So again, just kudos to you. You made
Thank
me
you.
give a shit about, um, and I found it so interesting. And this is a side question because I didn't even. This is going to be a curveball to you. Um, I noticed that you mentioned some buildings you were recollecting to Chicago,
Hmm.
and I was just wondering if you were throwing in some favorites of local spots that you might enjoy yourself looking at that you had to purposely include in your novel just to be like a little shout out to Chicago.
What's really interesting in this book is I wrote the beginning of this 10, 12 times, I don't know, a lot of times because I couldn't
Hmm.
quite, and I'm still like, it's a hard place to start because at one point she is I think I can say this without it being a spoiler. At one point, she's actually at a funeral, and she's, contemplating all these things and whatever. And then at another point, she was, already basically at one point, chapter two was chapter one. that didn't give enough. So it was really hard. And one of those versions had her in her office when a certain event from her past happened. I'm trying to be
Mm-hmm.
really careful here. And I just love this
Isn't it
idea.
fun?
It's hard because then they're going to be like, what?
What? Yeah.
The dystopian sort of version of Chicago. So I kind of like implied, I think, if this is the version that got in there, is that, Chicago has had some other sort of kind of disaster again, like the Chicago fire, and
The
we're no
second
longer
fire.
right, there we go. And we're no longer down like downtown because it's been
Mm-hmm.
destroyed and for whatever reason. Um Mainly just because I find stuff like that fascinating and I'm deeply disturbed. I don't know. I find things like Pompeii interesting, which I think is also pretty clear based on, Lyria.
Mm-hmm.
And that idea of what is destroyed and what does that look like and how do we, what does life look like after you move on from something like that. And I live outside of Chicago, so I decided to destroy my own city. I don't know what to say about that.
Well, I know a good psychologist. She's just in space. Um,
You
I
know
would
a
say,
questionable
yeah, I know.
psychologist.
I know a cheap psychologist. Let's go that
There we
avenue.
go. I like that better.
Um, so this is a question I try and ask any author writer that I know. Specifically for this genre, so we're just talking about either science fiction, horror, or the melding of the two. What advice would you give to younger writers who are trying to kind of tackle this specific narrowing genre? Like, how should they be approaching, whether it be like what books do you suggest to read, or the style of writing to prepare themselves in? Any advice for them?
So I think the most important thing is to write what you love. So if you are looking, the best thing that you can do is to, if there's something that you want to read and it's not on the shelf, just write it. Which I know is really easy for me to say, but I found my experience has proven, generally speaking, that if there's something that I want to read, something that I'm really excited about, that transmits itself through the work. And so then when you're sharing it with publishers or with agents, then they kind of pick up on that. I feel like a lot of basic writing craft is hugely, hugely important. And to do that, you really just need to find the book, the master class, whatever that speaks to you. Some things I would recommend. I talked about Goal, Motivation, and Conflict by Deborah
Hmm.
Dixon. That was huge for me. Understanding The Writer's Journey by Christopher Vogler. Not that you
Hmm.
necessarily want to write to that, but that you just have an understanding of sort of that vague shape. Michael Haig has something like six stages of story, which just sort of helps me kind of when I'm telling a story, sometimes, like I said earlier, it doesn't all show up in one whole cohesive piece. So sometimes I'm trying to figure out how to rearrange things, and if I'm here, how do I get to there? And so sort of knowing that there's a form to story has helped me in sort of puzzling things out. Because then you're like, it's kind of basically the metaphor of finding the corners of a puzzle. If you've got the corners, you can fill in everything else, and that's
Yep.
basically what that does. So knowing how to write in is more important at first, and then knowing your genre expectations. Like, so if you're going to go in and write sci-fi horror, if you're going to write, I don't know, vampire, I don't know, Amish vampires
Erotica.
or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. Exactly. Know what those expectations are, because you can play around with some things, but there's a huge discussion ongoing right now, which I'm almost afraid to even mention, on threads, where people are arguing that romance can have a not have an ending that's not happy. And I'm like, no, because that is actually the form and function of that genre. If you do not have a happily ever after, you don't have a romance, you have a love story. And so knowing those little tricky things about your genre are important, because what you don't want to have is a cover or a blurb that advertise it as one thing, and then people pick it up and then they're angry because they've gotten something else. So know the genre that you're wanting to write in, whether it's a mixed genre or whatever, and know your craft. My critique partner, Linnea Sinclair, She talks about it like if you are telling somebody we're going to go get pizza, we're going to go get pizza, and we walk into a pizza place and they're serving sushi, it's not that you don't love sushi, it's just that's not what you were aiming
Yeah.
for. So those are the things that I would say have been most helpful. But finding the books that speak to you and why they speak to you and understanding your own tastes so you can chase them. I think that's important too.
Well, first off, shout out for writing a pizza book that had pizza inside, because
Yay!
I've read plenty of pizza with sushi inside. I will tell you that. And I'm going to be contemplating tonight whether or not Romeo and Juliet is a love story or a romance. So thank you for that.
It is a tragedy. Romeo and Juliet is a tragedy.
Tragedy. Ooh.
It is.
For
It says it's the tragedy of Romeo and Juliet is the full title. English
mm,
major.
uh, unless you just root for death, and then it's
Well, right. Well, then it's just fun because it's like really because you're gonna like what oh no, she's not gonna tell him that. Yeah, there's a whole lot.
yeah,
So there's this the
yeah.
trope of miscommunication. Like
Mm,
people get mad about that. Oh, it's overused. I'm like, it's been around since Shakespeare. It's gonna continue. It's not going away.
yeah.
So, yeah,
It's been around since the hieroglyphics. We have not gone as far in how we speak to each other and how we act with each other than people really believe. It's the reason why there are movies that you can still watch from the mid 1900s, and there's a reason why we're still reading books from the thousands. So
well,
it's a
people are.
silly.
That's what I love about it is people are people. That's one of the things I love about writing sci-fi horror. I try to find that element. People are people and they bring their baggage with them everywhere they go. And we're
Hmm.
never, no matter who you are and no matter how advanced you are, no one is going to want to be vulnerable. So those miscommunication tropes are frequently about I'm not going to say something because I don't want to be made vulnerable in some way. So
Hmm.
I feel like as long as we're still human beings and not, robots with mushy brains inside or something, we're going to keep doing that, right? We're going to keep yeah. So
It and Exactly. And more onto that, I think of the trope of, you're sitting in a space station and you hear a noise in the other thing and you go investigate. It's a space station. You have cameras in every room. Why aren't you checking the cameras? No, it's because that human need of curiosity and to find
got
out
to
what
see it
that
for
is.
myself.
And that's why they get murdered. And they're never going to learn the lesson. So, maybe it's just Darwin. Maybe all horror is just Darwin. That's
Darwinism.
all. That's all it is.
I kind of like that idea, honestly, because I really do. Yeah, well, in a way, it's like, can you learn to share your feelings and work together to save all of yourselves? And if you can't do that, then
Yeah.
like
I am a subscriber to reading people posting and talking about their relationships and how 99% of them can just be solved with, have you talked to them? Like, have you voiced
yes.
these concerns with that person?
Yep.
No, because we're all just children. So, speaking of, would you rather be stuck with Claire and her crew from Dead Silence or Ophelia and her crew from Ghost Station? I wouldn't say
Oh.
so. Situationally, obviously, it's vastly different. So I'm just going to say in a space station or in their ship, because otherwise, the interjecting of the two very different scenarios
It
are very
becomes
bleak.
yes. I'm like, I don't really want either of them. Um
So going back
that's
and thinking about your process of creating these characters, like who are you? You're sitting down, they're all say it's dinner, you're sitting down and you're like gonna have an honest conversation with these individual crew members at dinner. Like who are you sitting with? The crew from Dead Silence or the crew from Ghost Station?
I'm gonna probably sit with Claire and company only because well, let me put it this way. It depends on which point in Ghost Station. If we're talking about the beginning of the book when Ophelia is just getting there and everybody's all tense and angry and snappy and
Mm-hmm.
snarly, that's not fun.
No.
Now, if we're talking later in the book, then maybe that would be okay because they're starting to work their crap out. You know what I mean? But Claire and company, they have that, at least I hope I was aiming for them to have that found family feeling from the beginning.
Yeah.
Whereas Ophelia is definitely an outsider from the get-go, and
Mm-hmm.
you hope that by the end that they have formed some bonds. So it's just a very different situation in terms of personality. That's a little, that's a little different because I like all of them. But if you're talking about I want to have a nice dinner without stress, I'm going with Claire, and then we'll just make Baller sit somewhere else.
Yeah. Well, before we get to our final question, I
Mhm.
have just one more curveball for you.
Okay.
Um, so if you were to branch out again, say to a genre you have never written about before,
Hmm.
what genre are we jumping into?
Oh. Something I've never written before, like
Something you've
even
never
when
written before, ever.
I'm gonna have to be really careful how I answer this. Some form of fantasy. So
Some
something
form
with
of
magic.
fantasy.
Hmm.
Sure, why not? Spoilers. Possibly, maybe, hopefully. I like how
Mm, when we're
I
done
love how secretive this.
recording.
Oh, absolutely. All right. So, um, but I would like to close out with an important question because here at Gatecrashers, we want you to broadcast what you have going on to the world. So, what can your fans look forward to next? Any upcoming projects? Not talking about the one that we have been secretive about. But I might have been on Amazon and I might have seen something coming April 8th, I want to say 2025.
Yes, sir.
What's going on there?
So that is, it got announced very quickly this week, actually. I was not expecting us to be doing that, but it worked out really well. Cold Eternity is my next book. It's space horror again, sci-fi horror. Um, and it's coming out in 2025, so less than a year away already. And it is the story. I love the description. Usually, like, I kind of help and work with them because I have a background in copywriting. This time it came out of nowhere and it's just dead on. It's perfect, which leads me to believe that hopefully the manuscript is really close to being done. Because I'm still in edits. So basically, Hallie is witnessed something she shouldn't have, and from a political scandal standpoint, because she worked in the government out in it's called UNOC, the United Nations of Colonies, out and about
Hmm.
in whatever.
There's
And
that
so she's on the
acronym
run.
again.
I know. Well, I was thinking about it. We were talking about it earlier. One of the reasons I think I lean on that is not just because of, government and space and whatever. It's corporations. Corporations
Yeah.
love their acronyms. Oh my gosh. Um, so she saw something she shouldn't have. She's on the run, and she ends up in this place called a dead ship. And, nothing ominous about that, of course.
No.
And basically what this is in this future, we still have some people living on Earth, obviously. But we have like domed colonies on Mars and on the moon, and we have space stations, and we're, sucking the water out of Enceladus and, shipping it elsewhere and whatever.
Hmm.
Um, and we have a problem with what to do with our dead, and that is what intrigued me about this story is, we have a lot of rites and rituals around death. How would that change when we're in space, when we're on a planet where your ground is probably fairly limited, so you're not going to want to take up ground under the dome that you could be
Hmm.
using for fields to
Yeah.
bury people. Cremation actually, which when I was doing research for this, found this out. Cremation actually causes pollution, and not to mention it's fire, and possibly in a
Hmm.
contained space station's not a great idea.
Nope.
Um, and sending people, like, jetting them out of a torpedo pit or torpedo like, tubes, that's really risky because then you're like, possibly
There's
smashing
ships
into
just avoiding grandmas and,
right, exactly.
cousins just.
It's disrespectful and it's dangerous. It's terrible.
Yes.
So my theory was that there's this guy, a billionaire, not anybody we would know possibly, um, who's kind of a cultish sort of leader. And he says, he's like, basically, I have a hospital ship. It's the Clara Barton that I'm going to convert over to this project. And basically what it amounts to is if you have enough money, you can join my little group, my special organization, and we will cryogenically freeze you. We don't have a way of thawing you out yet, but we
Hmm.
will, I'm sure, in the future. And we'll freeze you, and then we'll wake you up when we have that figured out and when we can cure whatever's killing you. So if you're
Hmm.
dying of whatever, we can freeze you and
Yeah.
then whatever. Okay. So that's all 150 years prior to Hallie's story. So she's on this dead ship. That was 150 years ago. They never figured out cryogenics. They never figured out how to cure this stuff. And the problem is because you have this ship full of wealthy people, they were all encouraged or required to contribute to a trust. So this ship is still being paid for, and it just goes round and round and round in this space station or in this solar system. And it was for a while was a museum, where people would come on board and like pay to go see this pop star from 100 some years ago, and who's frozen in her whatever. But that's all dried up, and so now they're just kind of just going around in circles. And so she's going to be on there as a caretaker, as like the nighttime caretaker essentially. And that's not going to go well. I mean,
No.
come on now. But my favorite part of writing Hallie is that I told I always have several ideas going on at once, and I told my agent when we were talking about what to do next, I was like, I need a break. Ophelia was so cerebral in the sense of like questioning her own sanity that I need somebody who is not that, because that would just be so hard to do 2 books in a row. So Hallie is the exact opposite. I mean, basically you would have to, I don't know what you would have to have jump out in front of her before she'd go, oh yeah, okay, I guess that is Bigfoot or whatever. You know what I mean? She's just very like, there's got to be a rational explanation. She's so desperate for this solution to work that she will rationalize anything, which is so fun to me, because we on the other side are going, no, that's not good. Come on. But she's just like, no, I'm sure that there is a reason why this door that I closed and locked is now standing open. I'm sure. And you're like, So it was just a blast. It was just so much fun to write. I got to play around with some new things. There's so the description, if you read it, is something like the dread dystopia of Severance, Severance, and something about AI and Megan, and there is AI in there, which I again had fun with. So it was just a delight. I just really enjoyed it, and I hope other people do too. Otherwise, it's just me entertaining myself.
I'll obviously be reading it. And I'm assuming we'll be back here next April, I guess.
That would be
Doing
fantastic.
this all over again. Wow, a cultish billionaire selling snake oil. Who knew? Still so many years in the future. Also, kudos for it being Claire Barton and not Florence Nightingale. That was
Thank you.
a good choice. But wow, is any part of you wishing that you had some sort of like piece from each of these three that tie them all together so that you could be like it's in the same universe of some sort, but it just like all like kind of drags through like at different spots in timelines or the world or something. These three stories could be happening in some place, or were you just like, that is way above my pay grade. I like to write the book that I write and just hope that nobody pulls it apart to some other shit.
I so with Ghost Station, I was careful in that it could be the same universe, but I didn't want to like put Easter eggs in there, mainly because I'm
Yeah.
more focused on that specific story, and I didn't want people to get distracted like looking for the connections, thinking that it was, because I
Yeah.
mean already I have issues where like everyone's thinking that it's a sequel on it, and it's obviously not. They're completely
Hmm.
standalone.
They are.
um with Cold Eternity, I can't even remember. I'm trying to remember where I set that. I feel like it's in the middle. So I think Dead Silence is the one closest to us, and then Cold
Hmm.
Eternity, and then Ghost Station, but I might have those flipped. I don't off the
Because
top of my
Ghost
head remember.
Station's 2199, and
I
I
believe
thought
that's
that
right.
Dead Silence was like 2057 or maybe 2080. It's in the late 2000s or something like that.
I could actually go look if you wanted me to, because it's right
It's
there, but I don't.
it's okay. It's okay. This is
I
where
don't
canon.
remember.
Canon right here is this is
Yeah.
you just have to read them all and you gotta find your own Easter eggs in there.
Well, and I know Ghost Station has to happen later, because my thought was if they were connected, you have the advancements in technology that are not that are obviously not existent in Dead Silence.
Yes, correct.
And I don't know, I would have to look back at Cold Eternity. I'm honestly not sure, because again, I have just turned in a first draft. So I'm waiting on edits, and sometimes I put things in there, I'm like, I'll think about that later. And then it's like, oh wait, now I have to figure this out. So I will have to contemplate that when I'm making my final revisions.
Well, I just have to say that obviously myself and everyone who listened to this and everyone who read Dead Silence, I encourage you to read Ghost Station. It was phenomenal, just another very enthralling horror sci-fi. I look forward to seeing both those HBO films in the future. Um, Fingers crossed.
That's right.
But I will say, as always, it is an absolute blast talking to you, and I hope we are back here next April, as long as nothing catastrophic or crazy happens again in the world. Who knows?
That unfortunately is as of the moment a very, very real
Very
possibility.
real
So let's hope
possibility.
not.
Yeah.
Thank you so
So
much for having me. It's always so much fun to chat with you. I like seriously, I feel like we could probably just carry on this conversation much longer.
I actually had to look up and be like, oh yeah, I need to I need to curb this at some point. Otherwise, we're gonna have a 3 hour interview, and everyone's gonna be like, what is this? So, for Gate Crashers, I was RJ Durante, joined by the wonderful Stacey Cade. Thank you so much. You can look for all of her books. They are available in bookstores, hopefully everywhere, somewhere near you. And we look forward to seeing what you come out with next. So thank you again.
Thank you.